Have you ever been underestimated by someone who couldn't see your true potential? What you're about to hear is the incredible true story of Maya Rodriguez, a young woman whose boss thought she was just a waitress, until the night she shocked everyone at an elite corporate gala. If stories of justice and unexpected revelations inspire you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this tale of hidden talents and sweet vindication will leave you cheering. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. The morning sun cast long shadows through the grimy windows of Romano's, a mid-tier restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of rush-hour traffic, but inside the restaurant the atmosphere was thick with the smell of grease and the tension that seemed to perpetually hang between the kitchen and the dining room. Maya Rodriguez adjusted her black apron for what felt like the 100th time that morning, tucking a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear as she surveyed the empty dining room. At 24, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting tables for years, though her sharp, intelligent eyes suggested depths that her current occupation didn't reveal. "Rodriguez!" The voice of Vincent Romano, the restaurant owner, boomed from behind the bar. At 58, Vincent was a man who had built his modest empire through decades of grinding work, but success had made him arrogant. His thick frame filled out his expensive suits poorly, and his graying hair was always slicked back with too much gel. Table 6 needs their check, and don't forget to push the dessert menu. We need to move that tiramisu before it goes bad. Already handled, Mr. Romano, Maya replied smoothly, holding up the leather check folder. Her voice carried just a hint of her Puerto Rican heritage, though she'd lived in Chicago since she was 8. "And I sold 3 desserts at table 2. Vincent grunted, barely acknowledging her efficiency. This was their daily dance, Maya excelling at her job while Vincent treated her as nothing more than expendable help. What he didn't know was that every evening after her shift ended and she returned to her modest apartment in Logan Square, Maya would sit at her small kitchen table with language learning apps, international news websites, and correspondence course materials spread before her. The lunch rush began like clockwork at 11:30 a.m. The restaurant filled with downtown office workers, construction crews taking their break, and the occasional tourist who had wandered off the beaten path. Maya moved between tables with grace, switching effortlessly between the cheerful service voice she'd perfected and the genuine warmth she reserved for regular customers who treated her with respect. "Maya, honey, how's school going?" asked Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for the chicken parmesan. She was one of the few customers who bothered to learn Maya's name, and even fewer who knew she was working toward her master's degree in international relations. "It's going well, Mrs. Chen. I'm working on my thesis about diplomatic communication in multilateral negotiations," Maya replied, refilling the woman's coffee cup. The academic language felt strange in the restaurant setting, like wearing formal clothes to clean house. At the bar, Vincent was entertaining a group of local businessmen, regaling them with stories of his success, while occasionally glancing over to ensure Maya was working hard enough for his liking. His voice carried across the restaurant as he gestured broadly with his whiskey glass. "The key to running a successful restaurant," Vincent proclaimed, "is knowing your place in the hierarchy. The customers are at the top, then management, that's me, then the kitchen staff, and at the bottom, well—" He gestured dismissively toward Maya as she passed with a loaded tray. "The waitresses. They come and go, no ambition, no skills beyond taking orders." So, Maya's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but she continued her work. She'd heard variations of this speech countless times over the past 3 years. Vincent seemed to take particular pleasure in diminishing her in front of others, as if her quiet competence somehow threatened his authority. The afternoon dragged on with its usual rhythm. Maya handled difficult customers with diplomacy, mediated a dispute between the kitchen and a patron with food allergies, and even helped train a new busboy, all while Vincent took credit for the smooth operation whenever his business associates called. As the day shift wound down, Vincent approached Maya with a smug expression that she'd learned to recognize as trouble. "Rodriguez, I need you to work the Hartford Industries Gala tomorrow night," he announced, dropping the bombshell casually while counting the day's receipts. "It's a big catering contract, very important people. Black tie event at the Fairmont Hotel." Maya looked up from wiping down tables, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Romano, tomorrow's my night off. I have plans." "Plans?" Vincent laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "What plans could you possibly have? You're a waitress. This is what you do." Hartford Industries is one of the biggest corporations in the Midwest. This event could lead to more high-end catering contracts. I understand it's important, but I've had this evening blocked off for weeks. I have commitments. Commitments. Vincent's voice rose, drawing the attention of the remaining customers. Let me make something clear, Rodriguez. You work for me. Your commitment is to this restaurant. Whatever little social gathering you think you need to attend can wait. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. Mr. Romano, with respect, I'm asking for fair notice. If you need someone for tomorrow, perhaps nothing. Vincent slammed his hand on the bar, his face reddening. You know what your problem is? You think you're better than this job, better than this place. But look around, honey. This is your reality. You're just a waitress. Act like one. The restaurant fell silent. The few remaining customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while the kitchen staff peered through the service window. Maya stood perfectly still, her hands clenched at her sides, every muscle in her body taut with suppressed anger and humiliation. Fine, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll work tomorrow night. Good girl, Vincent said with satisfaction, turning back to his paperwork as if nothing had happened. Be here at 5. Wear something nice. Try to look professional for once. As Maya gathered her things to leave, her hands trembled slightly. The weight of 3 years of accumulated slights, dismissive comments, and public humiliation pressed down on her shoulders. She'd endured it all for the steady paycheck that helped fund her education, the flexible schedule that allowed her to attend evening classes, and the tips that supplemented her meager savings. But as she stepped out into the cool Chicago evening, something had shifted. The familiar sounds of the city, honking horns, distant music, the chatter of pedestrians seemed muted, overshadowed by the echo of Vincent's words, "You're just a waitress." Walking toward the L station, Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She hesitated over a name, Dr. Amanda Hartford, her thesis advisor and, as Maya had recently learned, daughter of Charles Hartford, CEO of Hartford Industries. Maya had been planning to attend a small celebration tomorrow night for Dr. Hartford's recent appointment as head of the International Studies Department, a gathering that would include several prominent academics and diplomats. Maya stared at the contact for a long moment, then put her phone away without making the call. Tomorrow night would change everything. She just didn't know how yet. The train ride home gave her time to think, to plan, and to remember why she'd endured Vincent's treatment for so long. Every insult had been fuel for her ambition. Every dismissive comment a reminder of what she was working to leave behind. As the city lights blurred past the window, Maya's reflection looked back at her with determined eyes. Tomorrow night, Vincent would get exactly what he'd asked for, a professional waitress who knew her place. He just had no idea what that place really was. Maya's alarm buzzed at 6 a.m., though she'd been awake for hours. Her small apartment in Logan Square was modest but carefully organized, a reflection of someone who had learned to maximize limited resources. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing volumes in multiple languages, international policy journals, and diplomatic histories that most people would find impossibly dry. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of strong coffee, her laptop open to correspondence with Dr. Amanda Hartford. The email, sent at 2 a.m., was brief, but carried the weight of a difficult decision. "Dr. Hartford, I'm afraid I won't be able to attend tomorrow evening's celebration." "A work obligation has come up that I cannot avoid. I deeply regret missing this opportunity to meet your colleagues from the diplomatic corps. Best regards, Maya Rodriguez." The response had arrived just an hour later. "Maya, I understand work obligations, but I'm disappointed you'll miss meeting Ambassador Chen from the Chinese consulate and Deputy Minister Müller from Germany. They were both eager to discuss your thesis research on multilateral communication strategies. Another time, perhaps." Amanda Meyer stared at the screen, her coffee growing cold. These were exactly the types of professional connections that could transform her career prospects, the bridge between her current reality and the diplomatic future she'd been working toward for 6 years. She closed the laptop and began her morning routine, but her movements were mechanical, distracted. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vincent had unknowingly forced her to choose between serving his wealthy clients and networking with the very people who could help her escape that life forever. At Romano's, the day shift passed in a blur of typical chaos. The kitchen was behind on prep work, 2 servers had called in sick, and Vincent was in an especially foul mood because of the pressure to perform perfectly for the Hartford Industries Gala. "Rodriguez!" he barked during the lunch rush. Table 12 wants their steaks well done, not medium. Do you understand the difference, or do I need to draw you a picture? Maya bit back her response and headed to the kitchen to correct an order that had actually been prepared exactly as requested. She'd learned that fighting Vincent on small inaccuracies only led to bigger confrontations. As the afternoon wore on, Vincent's anxiety about the evening event manifested in increasingly demanding behavior. He criticized Maya's table settings, questioned her ability to properly serve wine, and made several pointed comments about the importance of knowing your role in front of important people. "These aren't your regular customers, Rodriguez," he said, adjusting his tie for the third time in an hour. "These are millionaires, CEOs, people who matter. They expect a certain level of sophistication. Just keep your head down, do your job, and try not to embarrass me." At 4 p.m., Maya went home to change, leaving Vincent to continue his nervous preparations. Her apartment felt different somehow, as if she was seeing it through the eyes of someone preparing to leave it behind. She showered and stood in front of her modest closet, considering her options. For work at Romano's, she had her usual black pants and white blouse. For her academic life, she owned 2 professional suits and several conservative dresses. But hanging in the back, still in its dry cleaning bag, was a dress she'd bought impulsively 6 months ago. Her elegant black cocktail dress that had been on sale at Nordstrom Rack. She'd told herself it was for job interviews or academic conferences, but she'd never found an occasion special enough to wear it. Tonight seemed like the night. The dress fit perfectly, transforming her from Maya the waitress into someone who looked like she belonged at a diplomatic reception. She styled her hair in a sophisticated updo, applied makeup with the skill of someone who'd watched hundreds of YouTube tutorials, and added the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for graduation. Looking in the mirror, Maya hardly recognized herself. This version of her could easily be Dr. Maya Rodriguez, international relations expert, rather than Maya the server who endured daily humiliation for a paycheck. She arrived at the Fairmont Hotel at 4:45 p.m., 15 minutes early as always. The venue was breathtaking. The grand ballroom had been transformed with elegant floral arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and round tables dressed in pristine white linens. The stage was set up for speeches, and a jazz quartet was doing sound checks in the corner. Vincent was already there, looking uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo and barking orders at the catering staff. When he saw Maya, his expression shifted to surprise, then suspicion. "Rodriguez, what are you wearing?" "You said to look professional," Maya replied evenly. "This is my most professional dress." Vincent's eyes narrowed. The transformation was too dramatic, too polished. Maya looked like she belonged among the guests rather than serving them, and that clearly made him uncomfortable. "Well, just remember your place tonight. These people don't want to chat with the help." Observe, smile, stay invisible. As guests began arriving at 6 p.m., Maya found herself in a strange position. Moving through the crowd with champagne trays, she recognized faces from international news programs, academic journals, and diplomatic publications. There was Congressman Bradley, who sat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Dr. Sarah Kim from the Council on Foreign Relations was holding court near the bar. And there, just entering with a small group, was Dr. Amanda Hartford herself, accompanied by two people Maya recognized from her thesis research, Ambassador Chen and Deputy Minister Muller. Maya's heart raced as she watched her thesis advisor scan the room, clearly looking for someone, looking for her. The weight of her choice pressed down like a physical burden. Here was everyone she'd been hoping to meet, the professional connections that could change her life, and she was invisible to them, hidden in plain sight behind a server's role. Vincent appeared at her elbow, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "See that group by the windows? That's Charles Hartford himself, the CEO. And the woman with him is his daughter, some professor type. Very important people, Rodriguez. Very important." Maya's grip tightened on her tray. "I understand, Mr. Romano." "Good. Now get over there and make sure their glasses never get empty. And remember, invisible." As Maya approached Dr. Hartford's group, she caught fragments of their conversation. They were discussing the complexities of trade negotiations with China, the exact topic of her thesis research. Ambassador Chen was making a point about cultural communication barriers that Maya had addressed in her latest chapter. "The challenge," Ambassador Chen was saying in lightly accented English, "is that many Western negotiators assume direct communication is universally preferred." But in Chinese diplomatic culture, indirect communication often carries more weight, more nuance. "Exactly," replied Deputy Minister Müller in precise German-accented English. "This is why multilingual diplomatic training is so crucial, understanding not just the words, but the cultural context behind them." Dr. Hartford nodded thoughtfully. "I have a graduate student who's been researching exactly this phenomenon. Maya Rodriguez, brilliant young woman." She should be here tonight, but unfortunately had to work. She glanced around the room with a slight frown. Such a shame. She would have fascinating insights on this topic. Maya stood frozen 3 feet away, holding a tray of champagne, listening to her thesis advisor praise her work to the very people she'd been desperate to meet. The irony was so sharp it was almost physical pain. Vincent appeared beside her, having noticed she'd stopped moving. "Rodriguez, why are you standing there? Offer them drinks." His voice was loud enough to interrupt the scholarly conversation. Dr. Hartford's group turned toward them, and Maya found herself looking directly into her advisor's eyes. For a moment, recognition flickered across Dr. Hartford's face, confusion, then dawning understanding. But before anyone could speak, Vincent stepped forward with his most obsequious smile. "Dr. Hartford, I presume, Vincent Romano, owner of Romano's restaurant." "We're handling your father's catering tonight. I hope everything meets your expectations." "Yes, everything's lovely," Dr. Hartford replied politely, though her eyes kept drifting back to Maya with growing certainty. "Excellent. This is one of my servers, Maya. She'll take excellent care of you tonight." Vincent gestured dismissively toward Maya, as if she were part of the furniture. "Maya, offer these distinguished guests some champagne." The moment stretched like a taut wire. Maya stood at the center of 2 worlds that were about to collide, holding champagne she wanted to throw in Vincent's face, looking at the professional future she'd sacrificed to be here. Dr. Hartford's expression had shifted from confusion to outrage as the pieces fell into place. "Maya," Dr. Hartford said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and concern. "Maya Rodriguez." Vincent looked between them, his smile faltering. "You—" "Know each other?" And in that moment, with the weight of 3 years of humiliation pressing down on her, Maya made a choice that would change everything. She set down her tray with deliberate precision, straightened her shoulders, and looked Vincent directly in the eye. "Dr. Hartford is my thesis advisor," Maya said clearly, her voice carrying across the immediate area. "I'm completing my master's degree in international relations at the University of Chicago." Vincent's face went white, then red, then white again. The silence stretched as the implications sank in, not just for him, but for everyone within earshot who had overheard his dismissive introduction of Maya as just a server. The collision between Maya's 2 worlds had begun, and there was no going back. The silence that followed Maya's revelation stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. Vincent's face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light, confusion, embarrassment, and finally, a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. You never mentioned, Vincent stammered, looking between Maya and Dr. Hartford as if hoping this was some kind of elaborate joke. Dr. Hartford stepped forward, her professional demeanor barely containing her outrage. Maya, I had no idea. When you said you had a work obligation, I never imagined. She gestured around the elegant ballroom, then back to Maya's server uniform. How long have you been working for this man? 3 years, Maya replied quietly, acutely aware that their conversation was drawing attention from other guests. Ambassador Chen and Deputy Minister Müller had moved closer, their diplomatic training making them excellent readers of social tension. Vincent attempted to laugh it off, but the sound came out strangled. Well, this is... What a coincidence. Small world, right? Maya's a very dedicated employee, very reliable. Reliable? Dr. Hartford's voice carried the sharp edge of academic authority that had intimidated countless students over the years. Mr. Romano, are you telling me that you forced one of my most promising graduate students to miss a crucial networking event to serve drinks? Forced? No, that's not. She works here. It's her job. Vincent was sweating now, his confident restaurant owner persona crumbling under the scrutiny of people he desperately wanted to impress. Ambassador Chen cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should find somewhere more private to continue this conversation? But Maya had reached a breaking point. 3 years of suppressed anger and humiliation were rising like a tide, and Vincent's attempt to minimize the situation was the final straw. Actually, Maya said, her voice gaining strength, I think this conversation is exactly where it needs to be. She turned to face Vincent fully, no longer the submissive employee he thought he knew. You want to talk about reliability? Let's talk about how I've covered for your mistakes for 3 years. Let's discuss how I've mediated disputes with suppliers when you couldn't communicate effectively with them. Vincent's eyes darted nervously to the growing circle of distinguished guests. Rodriguez, this isn't the time or place. When is the time, Mr. Romano? When you're humiliating me in front of customers? When you're telling your business associates that waitresses have no ambition, no skills? Maya's voice remained controlled, but it carried clearly across the immediate area. Or how about this morning, when you told me I'm just a waitress and need to know my place? A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Charles Hartford himself had noticed the commotion and was approaching with the measured steps of someone accustomed to corporate crisis management. Vincent made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Look, there's obviously been some misunderstanding. Maya is a valued employee, and I'm sure we can work this out privately." "The only misunderstanding, Doctor." Hartford interrupted coldly. "Is that you've been systematically degrading one of the most intellectually gifted students I've ever had the privilege to advise. Maya, would you like to tell these gentlemen about your thesis research?" Maya looked around the circle of faces. Vincent's panicked expression, Dr. Hartford's encouraging nod, the curious attention of Ambassador Chen and Deputy Minister Muller. The moment felt surreal, like stepping through a doorway into a parallel universe where her academic achievements mattered as much as her ability to carry a tray. "My thesis examines the role of multilingual communication in diplomatic negotiations," Maya began, her voice finding its academic rhythm. "Specifically, how cultural nuances embedded in language can either facilitate or hinder international agreements." Deputy Minister Miller's eyebrows rose with interest. "That's fascinating work." "What languages are you examining?" "I'm fluent in Spanish, French, and German, and I'm working on Mandarin and Arabic," Maya replied. "Each language carries specific diplomatic traditions and communication styles that can dramatically impact negotiation outcomes." Vincent stood frozen as the conversation continued around him, watching Maya transform from his reliable waitress into a sophisticated academic discussing complex international relations theory with some of the most influential people in the room. Ambassador Chen leaned forward with genuine interest. "Have you considered the role of indirect communication in East Asian diplomatic traditions? It's an area where many Western negotiators struggle." "Actually, that's a central focus of my research," Maya replied, warming to the topic despite the bizarre circumstances. "The concept of saving face isn't just about pride, it's about creating space for compromise without forcing anyone into a position of public defeat." "Brilliant," murmured Deputy Minister Muller. "And you developed this research while working full-time?" "Yes, sir. Evening classes, weekend research, early mornings in the library." Maya's voice carried quiet pride, but also an undertone of exhaustion that spoke to the years of sacrifice required to pursue two demanding paths simultaneously. Charles Hartford had reached the edge of the group and was listening with the focused attention of someone accustomed to evaluating talent. Vincent noticed his arrival and made one final attempt to insert himself into the conversation. "Mr. Hartford, Vincent Romano, we spoke earlier about expanding our catering services. As you can see, we employ some very educated people, very diverse backgrounds, very poorly treated from what I'm observing," Charles Hartford interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who controlled billion-dollar contracts. He looked directly at Maya. "Miss Rodriguez, isn't it? My daughter has mentioned your work. Impressive research on diplomatic communication strategies." Vincent's face went pale. The Hartford Industries account represented the kind of prestige contract that could transform his restaurant's reputation and profitability. The last thing he could afford was to alienate the CEO. "There's clearly been some miscommunication here," Vincent said desperately. "Maya is a valued member of our team, and I've always encouraged her academic pursuits." "Have you?" Dr. Hartford's question was razor sharp. "Because Maya missed tonight's reception specifically to work your event." She was supposed to meet Ambassador Chen and Deputy Minister Müller to discuss potential opportunities with their respective organizations. The circle of guests had grown, and Maya realized that their confrontation had become the evening's main entertainment. She felt simultaneously exposed and empowered, as if she were shedding a disguise she'd worn for too long. Vincent looked around desperately, perhaps realizing for the first time the true magnitude of his miscalculation. These weren't just wealthy people to impress. They were Maya's professional contacts, her academic community, her real world finally colliding with the diminished version of herself that he'd insisted she maintain. "I think," Ambassador Chen said diplomatically, "that there may have been some confusion about Maya's circumstances. In my experience, individuals of exceptional talent often find themselves in positions that don't reflect their full capabilities." Quite right," agreed Deputy Minister Müller. "Maya, I'd be very interested in discussing your research further. We have several programs that might be relevant to your work." Vincent watched this exchange with growing horror, finally understanding that he hadn't been managing a simple waitress for 3 years. He'd been systematically humiliating someone whose academic credentials and professional connections far exceeded his own. Maya looked at Vincent, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time in years. She saw not the intimidating authority figure who had controlled her schedule and crushed her dignity, but a small-minded man whose greatest accomplishment was running a mediocre restaurant. The power dynamic that had defined their relationship for 3 years suddenly seemed ridiculous. "Mr. Romano," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying absolute certainty, "I quit." The words hung in the air like a declaration of independence. Vincent opened and closed his mouth several times, but no sound came out. Around them, the distinguished guests waited to see how this unexpected drama would resolve. But Maya wasn't finished. 3 years of suppressed intelligence, dignity, and self-worth were demanding their due, and the reckoning had only just begun. Vincent's face went through several shades of red as Maya's resignation hung in the air like a challenge. The distinguished guests around them maintained their polite attention, but Maya could sense the anticipation. Diplomats and business leaders were, after all, connoisseurs of power dynamics and conflict resolution. "You can't quit," Vincent sputtered, grasping for any semblance of control. "Not in the middle of an event. We have a contract with Hartford Industries. You're being unprofessional." Charles Hartford stepped forward, his expression cool and measured. "Mr. Romano, I think the unprofessional behavior here is quite clear, and it's not coming from Miss Rodriguez. Mr. Hartford, please, this is just a misunderstanding between employer and employee. These things happen, do they?" Charles Hartford's voice carried the weight of someone who had navigated corporate boardrooms for decades. "Because what I'm observing is that you've been systematically undervaluing and mistreating someone whose qualifications appear to exceed your own." Vincent's desperation was becoming palpable. The Hartford contract wasn't just significant, it was the kind of account that could elevate Romano's from a neighborhood restaurant to a serious catering operation. Losing it because of this confrontation would be catastrophic. Maya watched Vincent's mounting panic with a mixture of satisfaction and something approaching pity. She'd seen him intimidate servers, berate kitchen staff, and dismiss anyone he considered beneath him. Now, faced with people whose approval he desperately needed, his true character was on full display. "Maya," Dr. Hartford said gently, "I think our friends here would be very interested in hearing about your language work. Ambassador Chen was just mentioning the communication challenges in recent trade negotiations. The invitation was clear. Maya could step fully into her academic identity, leaving Vincent and his dismissive treatment behind. But something in Vincent's expression, a mixture of fear and incomprehension, made her pause. "Actually," Maya said, surprising everyone, including herself, "I think Mr. Romano is right about one thing. I do have professional obligations tonight." Vincent's relief was visible, but Maya continued before he could speak. "My professional obligation is to demonstrate exactly what those language skills look like in practice." Maya turned to Ambassador Chen with a slight bow. "大师先生，很高兴见到您。我一直在研究中美贸易谈判中的文化交流障碍." Ambassador Chen, "It's an honor to meet you. I've been researching cultural communication barriers in U.S.-China trade negotiations." Ambassador Chen's face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. He responded in Mandarin, and Maya engaged in a brief but sophisticated conversation about diplomatic protocol and linguistic nuance. Vincent watched this exchange with growing bewilderment, clearly understanding that something significant was happening, but unable to follow the conversation. Maya then turned to Deputy Minister Müller and switched seamlessly to German. "Herr Müller, Ihre Arbeit zur europäischen Handelsintegration war für meine Forschung von unschätzbarem Wert." "Mr. Müller, your work on European trade integration has been invaluable for my research." The deputy minister beamed and launched into a discussion of EU trade policies, which Maya handled with the fluency of someone who had spent years studying German diplomatic language and cultural context. The small crowd of guests had grown larger, drawn by the unusual spectacle of a server engaging in sophisticated diplomatic conversations in multiple languages. Maya could feel Vincent's mounting confusion and embarrassment, but she wasn't finished. When a waiter with a French accent approached to offer drinks, Maya engaged him in rapid French, discussing not just beverage preferences, but the economic impact of hospitality industry policies on immigrant workers. The young man's face transformed from professional politeness to genuine excitement as he realized he was talking to someone who understood both his language and his experience. Finally, Maya noticed Dr. Khalil from the University of Chicago's Middle Eastern Studies Department in the crowd. She approached him and began speaking in Arabic, discussing the role of language preservation in diplomatic relations across the Arabic-speaking world. With each language switch, Vincent looked more lost and more aware of the enormous gulf between Maya's capabilities and his understanding of them. The woman he had dismissed as just a waitress was conducting nuanced conversations about international relations, economic policy, and cultural dynamics in 5 languages with some of the most educated people in the room. Mon Dieu, whispered the French waiter to a colleague. Elle parle comme une diplomate. My God, she speaks like a diplomat. Dr. Hartford moved to stand beside her father, both of them watching Maya with admiration. Dad, she said quietly, this is why I was so disappointed she couldn't attend our reception tonight. Maya doesn't just speak these languages. She understands the cultural and diplomatic contexts that make communication truly effective. Charles Hartford nodded slowly. As CEO of a multinational corporation, he recognized exceptional talent when he saw it. Mr. Romano, he said, turning to the restaurant owner who was looking increasingly out of his depth, you said Miss Rodriguez was just a waitress. What exactly did you mean by that? Vincent struggled to respond. The dismissive phrase that had come so easily in his restaurant, surrounded by his staff and regular customers, seemed ridiculous in the face of what everyone had just witnessed. She works for me. She serves tables. That's her job. And what's your educational background, mister? Romano? The question was polite but pointed. I have a high school diploma. I built this business from nothing through hard work and... Admirable, Charles Hartford interrupted smoothly. And Miss Rodriguez has accomplished what she's shown us tonight while working for you full-time and presumably earning enough to support herself through graduate school. The implication was clear to everyone present. Vincent had been in a position of authority over someone whose intelligence, education, and professional prospects far exceeded his own, and he had used that authority to diminish and humiliate her. Maya watched Vincent's realization dawn with a mixture of satisfaction and something approaching sympathy. She had never intended to reveal the full scope of the contrast between them so publicly, but his insistence on maintaining his superiority had forced the comparison. Ambassador Chen approached Vincent with diplomatic politeness. Mr. Romano, you must be very proud to have had such a talented individual representing your establishment. Maya's diplomatic communication skills are quite remarkable. Yes, agreed Deputy Minister Müller. In Germany, we would call this verschwendetes Talent, wasted talent. But perhaps not wasted, since she has clearly continued developing her abilities. Vincent looked around the circle of distinguished guests, finally understanding that he wasn't being praised for his management skills. He was being politely criticized for failing to recognize and develop exceptional talent that had been working under his supervision for 3 years. The weight of this realization, combined with the very public nature of his humiliation, seemed to crush his remaining confidence. The man who had spent the evening boasting about his business acumen and dismissing his employees as replaceable had been revealed as someone who couldn't even recognize extraordinary ability when it was serving his customers every day. Maya felt a moment of genuine pity for Vincent, but it was quickly replaced by a clear understanding of what came next. This collision between her two worlds hadn't just exposed Vincent's limitations, it had finally freed her from them. Mr. Romano, Maya said quietly, I meant what I said earlier. I quit, effective immediately. She turned to Dr. Hartford, Ambassador Chen, and Deputy Minister Müller, with the confidence of someone who had just reclaimed her professional identity. Now, shall we discuss those opportunities you mentioned? As the distinguished guests moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, leaving Vincent standing alone among the abandoned champagne glasses, Maya felt the weight of 3 years of diminished expectations lifting from her shoulders. The reckoning was complete, but her real career was just beginning. 3 months later, Maya stood in the lobby of the Hart Senate Office building in Washington, D.C., is adjusting the lapels of a tailored navy blazer. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the marble floors and creating an atmosphere of dignified purpose that still felt surreal after years of grimy restaurant lighting. Her reflection in the polished elevator doors showed a woman transformed, not just in appearance, but in bearing. The professional wardrobe, courtesy of her new position as a junior policy advisor with the State Department's Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs, was the external manifestation of an internal revolution that had begun that night at the Fairmont Hotel. Maya, Dr. Amanda Hartford's voice echoed across the lobby as she approached with her characteristic brisk stride. Ready for your first congressional briefing? As ready as anyone can be, Maya replied, though her smile showed genuine excitement rather than nervousness. The transition from graduate student to policy advisor had been rapid, facilitated by the connections made during her dramatic resignation from Romano's, but she had thrown herself into the work with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. They rode the elevator to the 7th floor in comfortable silence, Maya reviewing her notes one final time. Today's briefing was on communication strategies for upcoming trade negotiations with a coalition of Southeast Asian nations. Exactly the kind of multilateral diplomatic challenge she had spent years studying in theory and was now helping to shape in practice. You know, Doctor, Hartford said as they walked down the corridor lined with official portraits, I still can't believe we almost missed this opportunity because of Vincent Romano's ego. Maya's expression darkened slightly at the mention of her former boss. Romano's restaurant had indeed lost the Hartford Industries contract after that night, along with several other high-profile accounts once word spread through Chicago's business community about Vincent's treatment of his employees. The restaurant was still operating, but Vincent had been forced to sell his catering division and scale back his ambitions considerably. I heard through the grapevine that he's been trying to rebuild his reputation, Maya said diplomatically. Part of me feels bad about how everything unfolded, but I can't regret finally standing up for myself. The briefing room was already filling with congressional staffers, policy experts, and representatives from various agencies when they arrived. Maya recognized several faces from academic conferences and policy papers, but now she was meeting them as a colleague rather than an aspiring graduate student seeking advice. Congressman Bradley, whom Maya had observed from afar at the Hartford Gala, approached with an outstretched hand. Miss Rodriguez, Amanda's told me excellent things about your work on diplomatic communication strategies. I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on how language barriers affect economic negotiations. As Maya launched into a discussion of her recent analysis of communication breakdowns in previous trade agreements, she felt the familiar thrill of intellectual engagement that had sustained her through 3 years of diminished expectations. But now, instead of discussing these concepts over late-night coffee in her small apartment, she was contributing to actual policy decisions that would affect international relations. The briefing itself went smoothly. Maya presented her recommendations for culturally sensitive communication protocols, drawing on her multilingual abilities to provide specific examples of how linguistic nuances could either facilitate or sabotage negotiations. The room was attentive, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine respect for her expertise. During the coffee break, Ambassador Chen, who had flown in from Chicago for the briefing, approached Maya with a warm smile. Maya, I wanted you to know that your suggestions from our conversation 3 months ago have already proven valuable in our preliminary discussions with the Philippine delegation. Your insight about face-saving language has helped us avoid several potential misunderstandings. I'm grateful the research has practical applications, Maya replied. It's still surreal to see theoretical work translate into real-world diplomatic outcomes. Theory without practice is empty, but practice without theory is blind, Ambassador Chen quoted. You've managed to bridge both worlds exceptionally well, especially considering the unusual circumstances under which we first met. Maya laughed, remembering the chaos of that night. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Vincent had just given me the night off, like any reasonable employer would have. Perhaps we would have met at Amanda's reception and had a polite academic conversation, Ambassador Chen mused. But we wouldn't have seen your grace under pressure, your ability to maintain dignity while being publicly dismissed. Those qualities are as valuable in diplomacy as linguistic ability. As the briefing reconvened, Maya felt a profound sense of alignment between her abilities and her circumstances that had been missing for years. Every skill she had developed, the languages learned during late-night study sessions, the cultural sensitivity gained from serving diverse customers, even the composure developed through enduring Vincent's public humiliations, was now being deployed in service of work that mattered to her. The afternoon session focused on specific negotiation scenarios, and Maya found herself naturally taking on a facilitation role, helping monolingual participants understand the cultural implications of various communication approaches. It was exactly the kind of multilingual diplomacy work she had dreamed of, but couldn't have imagined accessing so directly. After the formal proceedings ended, Dr. Hartford joined Maya for dinner at a small restaurant near Capitol Hill. Nothing fancy, but chosen for its quiet atmosphere, conducive to conversation. "So," Dr. Hartford said over wine, "any regrets about leaving Chicago? I know the transition has been rapid." Maya considered the question seriously. The move to Washington had required leaving behind her Logan Square apartment, her familiar routines, and the city that had shaped her adult life. But it had also meant leaving behind the daily reminders of her years, serving people who looked through her as if she were invisible. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of the old routine," she admitted. "There's something to be said for work that ends when you clock out versus work that follows you home because you care too much about the outcomes. But I don't miss feeling like I was wasting my potential every day." "And Vincent? Any word from Romano's?" Maya shook her head. "Nothing direct." "Though I did hear from Maria, one of the other servers, that he hired someone with a hospitality degree to replace me. Apparently, he's been telling people he always knew I was overqualified for the position." Dr. Hartford snorted derisively. "Revisionist history. I still remember his face when you started speaking Mandarin with Ambassador Chen. I don't think he realized that intelligence could exist without a business degree and a tie." "To be fair," Maya said, surprising herself by defending her former tormentor, "I never gave him much indication of my academic work. I kept those worlds completely separate." "Because you had to," Dr. Hartford pointed out, "because he created an environment where your actual qualifications were seen as a threat rather than an asset. That's not your failure, Maya. That's his." The conversation drifted to Maya's current projects, her upcoming travel to Southeast Asia for preliminary cultural consultations, and her long-term career plans within the diplomatic corps. As they talked, Maya realized how much her internal narrative had changed. 3 months ago, she had been a graduate student who happened to work as a waitress. Now, she was a policy advisor who had learned valuable lessons about human nature and dignity during a brief stint in the service industry. The restaurant they had chosen was busy with the evening rush, and Maya found herself automatically observing the servers, their efficiency, their interactions with difficult customers, their quiet professionalism in the face of demanding circumstances. She caught the eye of their waiter, a young man who was clearly working hard to pay for something larger than his current circumstances. "Excuse me?" Maya said in Spanish when he brought their check, recognizing his accent as Central American. Are you by any chance a student? His face brightened in surprise. Yes, ma'am. I'm working on my engineering degree at GW. How did you know? Just intuition, Maya replied, switching back to English. Good luck with your studies, and thank you for excellent service tonight. As they left the restaurant, Dr. Hartford smiled at the exchange. Still mentoring aspiring professionals, I see. Once you've been underestimated yourself, you recognize the signs in others, Maya said. That young man is probably brilliant, but most of his customers will only see someone bringing them food. Walking through the Washington evening, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her from Romano's grimy dining room to the halls of congressional power. The path had been neither straight nor simple, but every frustration and humiliation had contributed to her understanding of how power works, how dignity survives under pressure, and how talent finds its way to the surface despite systematic efforts to suppress it. 6 months later, Maya's work on Southeast Asian trade negotiations had earned her recognition within the State Department and led to a promotion to senior policy advisor. She had testified before congressional committees, briefed cabinet-level officials, and represented the United States at international conferences where her multilingual abilities and cultural insight proved invaluable. The memory of Vincent Romano's dismissive, "You're just a waitress," had faded from a source of pain to a reminder of how completely someone could misread another person's potential. Maya occasionally wondered if he had learned anything from their confrontation, but she was too busy building the career she had always known she was capable of to spend much time looking backward. On a quiet Sunday morning in her Georgetown apartment, Maya sat at her desk reviewing briefing materials for the following week's negotiations. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Chicago number. "Maya, this is Vincent Romano. I wanted to reach out and apologize for how I treated you." "I realize now that I never took the time to understand who you really were or what you were capable of. I hope you're doing well in whatever you're doing now. I've been trying to do better with my current employees." Maya stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you for reaching out, Mr. Romano. I appreciate the apology. I hope you and the restaurant are doing well." She didn't mention her current position or the recognition she had received. Vincent's opinion of her success was no longer relevant to her self-worth, and his belated acknowledgement of her abilities couldn't restore the dignity he had systematically attacked for 3 years. But the apology did represent something important. Not redemption for him, but a small indication that people could learn, change, and recognize their mistakes. In her diplomatic work, Maya had learned that such recognition was often the first step toward more constructive relationships, even when the damage couldn't be fully undone. As Maya returned to her briefing materials, she reflected on the strange journey that had led from public humiliation to professional fulfillment. Vincent Romano's dismissive attitude had nearly cost her the career opportunity of a lifetime, but it had also forced her to finally claim her full professional identity publicly. Sometimes the greatest obstacles to our growth come from people who cannot imagine that we are capable of more than they can see. But when we finally step beyond their limited vision, we discover that the world is full of people who can recognize our true potential and help us achieve it. Maya's story had begun with someone telling her she was just a waitress. It had ended with her proving that there is no such thing as just anything, that every role contains the seeds of greater possibility, and every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are, rather than who others assume them to be. The young woman who had once absorbed daily humiliation to fund her education was now helping to shape international policy, and the transformation had taught her that dignity, once reclaimed, becomes a foundation for achievements that seemed impossible from the perspective of diminished expectations. Vincent Romano had been wrong about many things, but most fundamentally, he had been wrong about the nature of potential itself. It doesn't diminish when it's ignored. It simply waits for the right moment to reveal itself, and when it does, the revelation can change everything.